The sun was shining brightly over a quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped in the trees and a soft breeze rustled the leaves. Most people were enjoying their day off or working on small chores around their homes. On one street, everything seemed calm and ordinary. But there was something unusual about one house in particular. Outside, parked in the driveway, was a sleek, shiny sports car. It wasn't just any car. It was the kind that made heads turn even from a distance. Its black paint shimmered under the sunlight and its rims glinted like polished silver. Anyone walking past would notice it immediately. Inside the house, two men were finishing up their morning routine. From the outside, they looked like regular neighbors, smiling, laughing, and chatting casually as they went about their day. One was in the kitchen, preparing a light snack while the other was sitting by the window scrolling through his phone. They were enjoying a rare moment of peace, something that didn't happen often for them. For people like them, ordinary days were hard to come by, and they cherished every quiet moment. What the neighbors didn't know, and what would shock anyone if they found out, was that these two men were not ordinary at all. They were famous, more famous than anyone in the town could imagine. One of them had a smile that could light up a room and a presence that made people instantly feel inspired. The other had a calm but commanding aura, the kind that made people take notice even before he spoke. Both of them were stars in the world of sports and entertainment. But here, in this quiet neighborhood, they were just two men trying to enjoy a normal day. Meanwhile, a group of bikers was riding through the streets a few blocks away. They were loud, energetic, and full of adrenaline. Their engines roared as they sped past houses, and the sound echoed down the street. These bikers were known locally for their reckless stunts and their need to show off. Every time they rode through the neighborhood, people would peek out their windows, shaking their heads at the chaos. But for the bikers, it was all part of the fun. They thrived on attention and on testing the limits of their skills. Among the bikers, there was a sense of competition. Each wanted to prove who was the bravest, the fastest, or the most daring. One of them suggested a new idea, a stunt that could impress everyone in the group. It involved weaving around obstacles and making tight turns, the kind of risky move that could easily go wrong. Everyone agreed it would be exciting, not realizing just how close fate would bring them to something far beyond what they expected. The bikers didn't know that in just a few minutes, their actions would change everything. They rode carelessly down the streets, laughing and shouting, completely unaware that a shiny black sports car sitting quietly in a driveway would soon be their target. They were focused on each other, on their challenge, on proving who was the best. They didn't notice the way the sunlight reflected off the car, or how perfectly it was parked, or that it belonged to someone who could command attention just by walking outside. Back in the house, the two men were still enjoying their morning. They had chosen this neighborhood because it was quiet, peaceful, and far from the chaos of their usual lives. Here, no one screamed their names or asked for autographs. Here, they could just be themselves. One of them glanced out the window, smiling at a neighbor walking their dog. Everything seemed perfect. Everything seemed normal. Then the sound began, a low, rumbling growl of engines approaching fast. At first it was distant, almost like background noise, but soon it grew louder and louder until it filled the street with an unmistakable roar. The men looked at each other, a small frown forming on one face. They weren't alarmed yet. Loud vehicles were common in suburban neighborhoods, but something in the sound caught their attention, a recklessness that didn't belong. Outside, the bikers were approaching the driveway, their laughter growing louder as they saw the shiny black sports car. One of them pointed at it. "Check this out," he shouted to the others. "This car is perfect for our stunt. Let's make it a little more interesting." His tone was playful, but there was a dangerous edge to it. None of the bikers realized the car was not just valuable, it was priceless in ways they couldn't even imagine. The leader of the bikers signaled the others. They slowed down slightly, riding around the car in tight circles, showing off their skill. Engines revved, tires squealed, and the sound of metal on asphalt filled the quiet street. It was a dangerous dance, a game they played every time, but this time it was different. This time they were playing dangerously close to something far more important than they realized. Inside the house, one of the men noticed the movement from the window. He raised an eyebrow but didn't panic. Instead, he said quietly, "Something tells me trouble is coming." His friend nodded, finishing his snack and walking to the door. They were calm, collected, ready for anything because their lives had taught them to expect the unexpected. The bikers grew bolder. One of them, trying to impress the others, leaned too close to the car. He revved the engine and kicked the bike a little harder, misjudging the distance. For a moment, everything froze, the spinning tires, the shiny rims, the quiet suburban street. There was a moment of perfect tension, like the pause before a storm. Then it happened. The biker clipped the car's bumper. Metal crunched loudly, sending a sharp echoing sound through the neighborhood. Glass shattered from the car's lights and the biker skidded slightly, trying to regain control. What had been a playful stunt turned into a real disaster in seconds. Neighbors started coming out of their houses, alarmed by the noise. Some held their hands over their mouths in shock. Others quickly took out their phones to record the scene. The bikers were frozen, their excitement replaced with panic. They had never expected to cause this much damage, and they certainly had never expected the people who owned the car to appear. The two men stepped outside, their presence commanding immediate attention. The bikers looked up and froze. For the first time, they could see the faces of the men they had just angered. Their expressions were calm, but there was a weight to them that was impossible to ignore. They weren't angry yet, but their authority was clear. Anyone could feel it. Even from a distance, it was obvious that these were not ordinary men. Their posture, their calm confidence, the way they observed the chaos with sharp eyes. It was intimidating without being aggressive. The bikers had a sinking feeling that they were about to face the consequences of their reckless actions in a way they had never imagined. The street, which had been filled with the roar of engines a few moments earlier, was now completely silent. The neighbors watched, captivated as the bikers tried to explain themselves, their voices trembling. The men listened quietly, nodding occasionally but saying nothing. Their calmness was more powerful than any shout or threat could have been. And in that moment, the bikers realized that this day, which had started as a game, had turned into a life lesson. They didn't know it yet, but this encounter would stay with them forever. They had disrupted the peace of two men who could have responded in ways far more dangerous. Instead, they had been met with a quiet, firm authority that demanded accountability without aggression. For the two men, the day had taken an unexpected turn. They had been enjoying their rare time off, hoping for nothing more than a peaceful afternoon. Instead, they were faced with the chaos of reckless behavior. Yet, they handled it with the same calm they brought to every situation. They didn't panic, they didn't shout. They simply prepared to do what was necessary, as they always did. This was the beginning of a story that no one in the neighborhood would forget. It was a story of chaos and recklessness meeting calm authority, of lessons learned and mistakes realized, and of two men who could command attention without raising their voices. The bikers had no idea what they had started, and the quiet suburban street had never seen anything like it. The moment the bikers circled the car, things moved quickly. At first, it seemed like harmless fun, just another stunt to show off their skills. They revved their engines, tires squealing against the asphalt, laughing and shouting to each other. The sound was deafening, echoing through the quiet suburban street. It was chaotic, but in their minds it was just another game. One of the bikers, the most daring of the group, leaned closer to the car than anyone else dared. "Watch this!" he shouted over the roar of his engine, grinning widely. He was confident, full of energy, thinking this would impress everyone, but his confidence made him careless. He didn't notice how close he really was to the car. The rest of the group cheered him on, thinking nothing could go wrong. The sleek black car gleamed under the sun, its smooth lines shining beautifully. Every detail was perfect, the paint, the rims, the polished mirrors. To the bikers, it was just an obstacle, a challenge to ride around. They didn't know the value of what they were about to destroy, nor did they know who owned it. It wasn't just a car. It belonged to two of the most famous and physically powerful men in the world. But that thought never crossed their minds. As the biker made his daring move, a sudden miscalculation happened. His bike wobbled slightly, the front tire catching the edge of the driveway. He tried to correct it, twisting the handlebars quickly, but it was too late. The edge of the car's bumper met the bike metal scraping against metal. A loud, harsh crunch filled the air, and the biker stumbled, his balance almost lost. The other bikers froze for a moment. Their laughter stopped abruptly. The stunt had gone too far. The crunch was worse than they expected, and the car wasn't just scratched, it was dented. One of the bikers tried to reverse, but in the tight space, it only made things worse. Another bike scraped against the side mirror, snapping it off with a sharp crack. Glass shattered, falling like tiny diamonds onto the driveway. Panic set in. The group exchanged quick glances, their excitement replaced by fear. They hadn't planned for this. They had wanted to show off, not destroy a car. They didn't know how to handle the situation. One of them muttered, "Oh no. Oh no, what have we done?" Inside the house, the two men had been watching quietly. At first, they thought it was just another loud motorcycle passing by. But the sounds of metal crunching and glass breaking told them it was something more serious. One of them moved closer to the door, his expression calm but alert. He knew immediately that the car was being damaged, and he could sense the recklessness behind it. The bikers, noticing movement inside the house, finally realized they were being watched. They froze, staring at the door. Slowly, the two men stepped outside. Their presence was immediate and commanding, without a single word. The bikers felt their hearts skip a beat. They were no longer just facing an angry car owner. They were facing two men who radiated authority, strength, and presence. One of the bikers tried to laugh it off, speaking nervously. We didn't mean to." His words trailed off. He realized quickly that nothing he could say would lessen the damage or the seriousness of the situation. The two men looked at the car calmly, noting every dent, every scratch, every broken piece of glass. The calmness of the two men made the bikers even more nervous. Anger would have been easier to face. Yelling and shouting would have given them a way to argue, to defend themselves. But this calm authority was different. It made the bikers feel small, foolish, and powerless. They hadn't considered that their stunt could bring them face to face with people capable of handling the situation far better than they ever imagined. One of the bikers stepped back, trying to distance himself from the car. He wiped his sweaty hands on his jeans, muttering excuses that sounded hollow even to him. "We were just showing off," he said. The others murmured similar explanations. But the explanations fell flat. They knew that this was more than just showing off now. This was real damage, real consequences. The man closest to the car, who had caused most of the initial damage, was shaking slightly. He stared at the shiny black surface, now marred with dents and scratches. "I didn't think it would happen like this," he admitted quietly. There was genuine regret in his voice, and for the first time, fear replaced adrenaline. He looked at the two men outside, their calm faces giving nothing away, and realized this was serious. The surrounding neighbors had begun to gather on the sidewalks, some standing in their yards, others peeking through windows. They were drawn by the noise and the sudden attention. Phones were raised, recording the unfolding scene. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, as everyone sensed something remarkable was happening. The bikers were trapped in a moment of frozen panic. They looked at each other, unsure who should speak, what to do, or where to go. Their bravado had vanished. The weight of their actions was sinking in fast. Every mistake, every reckless move was suddenly very real, very concrete. The two men, meanwhile, remained calm and silent, taking in the damage and observing the bikers' reactions. They didn't raise their voices or show aggression. Instead, their presence alone was enough to command respect and attention. The bikers could feel the intensity of their gaze, the kind of focus that demanded honesty, accountability, and action. One of the bikers tried to make a quick escape, suggesting they leave before the owners could confront them further. But the thought of running was met with hesitation. They were on a small street, with neighbors watching, and their bikes were too close to the car to leave without causing even more damage. It was a trap they had created themselves. The man who had caused the initial collision took a deep breath. "Okay, we messed up. Big time," he admitted, finally accepting the reality of the situation. His words were honest, nervous, but they were also the first step toward taking responsibility. The two men listened carefully, not interrupting, letting the bikers own up to their mistakes. It was a quiet, powerful moment. They didn't need to yell or threaten. Their calm, composed approach made it clear that accountability was expected and that avoiding it was not an option. One of the bikers, who had been quieter until now, finally spoke up. We didn't know this was your car." His voice was almost a whisper, filled with nervousness and genuine regret. There was a sense of awe in his tone, a recognition that they had just come face to face with people they had only seen on screens, now standing right in front of them. The other bikers nodded, muttering similar words. We messed up. We really didn't mean it. They were beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a car. This was someone's property. Someone who had every right to be upset. And, as they were realizing slowly, it wasn't just about money or damage, it was about respect, about understanding boundaries, about realizing consequences. The man who had first caused the crash stepped forward slightly, his voice shaking. We can fix it. We'll pay for it. We'll do whatever it takes. It was a small, sincere offer, but it showed that he was ready to take responsibility, even if he was terrified of the reaction he would face. The two men looked at each other briefly, communicating silently with a nod. Then one of them spoke calmly, clearly, but without any anger. We appreciate honesty. That's the first step. His words were simple, but they carried a weight of authority and experience. The bikers listened intently, absorbing every word. It was a strange moment. Chaos had erupted just moments ago. Screeching engines, crashing metal, shattered glass, and now everything had paused. There was no shouting, no arguing. Just a quiet, tense understanding that the situation needed to be resolved responsibly. The neighbors continued to watch in awe, sensing the drama of the moment. Everyone could see the bikers' nervous expressions, the damage to the car, and the calm yet commanding presence of the two men. It was a story unfolding in real time, a lesson about recklessness, accountability, and human behavior. The bikers were still nervous, but slowly, their panic was being replaced by reflection. They began to realize that actions had consequences far beyond what they imagined. What had started as fun, a stunt to impress each other, had turned into a real, serious situation with consequences they could not escape. The street, once filled with the roar of engines, was now silent except for the occasional whispered apologies and the distant sounds of neighbors murmuring. The tension lingered, but it was tempered by the calm authority of the men who had been wronged. It was a reminder that chaos can be met with composure and recklessness with responsibility. And in that quiet, tense moment, the bikers knew their day had changed forever. They had come to show off, to thrill each other, to dominate the street. Instead, they had learned a hard lesson in humility, respect, and accountability, a lesson delivered without shouting, without violence, but with the undeniable presence of two extraordinary men. The bikers stood frozen, their hearts racing as they took in the sight before them. The two men who owned the car weren't ordinary. Even at a distance, their presence felt almost larger than life. The kind of presence that made you pause and think carefully before you spoke or moved. There was a calm strength about them that made the bikers' earlier bravado seem childish and foolish. At first, the bikers assumed the men would scream, shout, or storm out in anger. That was what they expected: shouts, threats, and maybe even physical confrontation. But what they got instead was silence. The two men stepped forward slowly, calmly, with steady eyes that observed every detail: the scratches on the car, the broken mirror, and the scattered glass. The bikers could feel their gaze like a weight pressing down, demanding honesty, attention, and understanding. One of the bikers swallowed hard, his mouth dry. We didn't know this was your car," he stammered. His voice shook. He tried to sound casual, but it was useless. The two men were not convinced by excuses or half-hearted apologies. The bikers suddenly realized that this was not just about a car. It was about respect, responsibility, and facing the consequences of their reckless actions. As the bikers tried to gather their thoughts, the two men looked at each other briefly, silently communicating. Then one of them spoke in a calm, firm voice. "This car is expensive, yes. But that's not the point. The point is that you made choices without thinking about others." His tone was even, without anger, but the weight of his words sank deep into the bikers' minds. The bikers looked at the car again, now really noticing the damage. The dented bumper, the scratched paint, the shattered lights, all of it screamed carelessness. They had thought it was just another stunt, just another thrill. Now the reality hit them like a punch. They had crossed a line they didn't even know existed. One of the bikers, trying to explain, raised his hands nervously. "We were just having fun." "We didn't mean to." "It was an accident," he said quickly, hoping that somehow the explanation would make a difference. But the calm authority of the men standing before him made every word sound hollow. The bikers could feel the truth in the silence. They had done wrong, and nothing they said could erase it. It was then that realization struck the group. These were not ordinary people. They were famous, yes, but more than that. They were physically imposing, disciplined, and confident in a way that demanded respect. The bikers' eyes widened. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had assumed this was just some rich neighbor, someone who might yell or call the police. But now they sensed that these men were powerful in ways they couldn't fully understand. The leader of the bikers took a step back, suddenly aware of how foolish he had been. His chest tightened and a sense of panic started to spread. He realized that this was more serious than he had ever imagined. Not only had they damaged an expensive car, but they had also crossed paths with two men who could handle the situation in ways far beyond their recklessness. The quiet authority of the men made the bikers shift nervously from foot to foot. They exchanged glances, each silently asking the others, "What do we do now?" None of them had prepared for this. They had planned stunts, thrills, and laughter, not a confrontation like this, and the weight of responsibility began to sink in. One of the bikers tried to lighten the mood, forcing a laugh that came out awkward and tense. Maybe we can fix it?" he suggested, hoping that taking initiative might lessen the anger, but the other bikers shook their heads. They knew it wasn't that simple. The damage wasn't minor. This wasn't just a scratch or a dent that could be easily repaired. They had caused serious harm, and the owner's presence made it impossible to ignore. The men observed the bikers carefully, not interrupting their nervous chatter. They didn't need to yell. Their calmness carried authority that words could not. Every biker could feel it, the sense that they were being evaluated not just for what they had done, but for how they would take responsibility moving forward. It was clear that honesty and accountability were the only way out of this situation. Finally, one of the bikers stepped forward slightly, his hands trembling. "We can pay for it," he admitted. "We'll do whatever it takes. We didn't mean any of this." There was genuine fear in his voice, but also a hint of sincerity. For the first time, he wasn't trying to impress anyone or act tough. He was simply acknowledging the mistake, facing the consequences. The two men nodded slowly. "That's the first step," one of them said. "Taking responsibility. Being honest. It shows that you understand the consequences of your actions." His tone was calm, but it carried a firmness that left no room for argument. The bikers listened, realizing that they were being taught a lesson far more important than money or property. It was about respect, integrity, and thinking before acting. The surrounding neighbors watched silently, captivated by the scene. They had never seen anything like it. A group of bikers clearly in trouble and two men handling the situation with quiet authority rather than anger or threats. Some recorded the moment on their phones, knowing it was a story they would tell for years. Others just watched, fascinated by the tension and the calm, commanding presence of the car owners. The bikers, sensing the attention of the neighbors, became even more self-conscious. Their bravado had completely vanished. They had come to the neighborhood thinking they were showing off, daring each other and having fun. Now they felt exposed, small and foolish. Every movement, every word was scrutinized not just by the two men, but by everyone around them. One of the bikers, the youngest in the group, lowered his head. He couldn't meet the eyes of the men standing before him. He felt shame, embarrassment, and fear all at once. We should never have done this," he admitted softly. "We got carried away." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that everyone could feel. The two men continued to observe, listening carefully to the bikers' explanations. They were not angry in the way people often expected. Instead, their presence alone created a sense of accountability that the bikers could not escape. The lesson was clear. Actions have consequences, and recklessness can affect more than just yourself. One of the bikers tried to speak again, his voice barely audible. We're sorry, truly. We didn't know who you were or what this would lead to." His hands shook slightly as he spoke. There was a sincerity in his tone that couldn't be faked. The two men nodded again, acknowledging the honesty without needing to say more. For a moment, there was silence. The tension hung in the air like a heavy curtain. The bikers were still nervous, but slowly, they began to realize that the way forward was clear. They had to take responsibility, face the consequences, and learn from their mistake. There was no escaping it. No excuses that would work. The calm authority of the two men had transformed what could have been a violent or chaotic scene into a moment of reflection and accountability. The bikers realized that they were learning something far more valuable than any stunt or thrill. They were learning about respect, humility, and facing the results of their own choices. The street was quiet except for the occasional murmured apology from the bikers and the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Neighbors continued to watch, some whispering to each other about the extraordinary situation unfolding before them. They could see the bikers' fear, their remorse, and the powerful, calm presence of the car owners. It was a story that would spread quickly, a moment that would be remembered in the neighborhood for years to come. One of the bikers finally spoke up, taking a deep breath. We want to make this right. Please tell us what we need to do." His words were filled with humility, a complete change from the reckless show-off attitude he had started with. The other bikers nodded in agreement, understanding that they had no other choice but to face the consequences fully. The two men exchanged a glance, silently agreeing that the bikers' willingness to take responsibility was a step in the right direction. "You will take responsibility," one of them said simply. "That is the only way forward." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger. It was a clear, calm statement of fact. The bikers could only nod, accepting the truth of the words. And in that moment, the bikers realized something else. They were fortunate. They could have faced a much harsher reaction, but the two men chose calm, controlled authority over anger. They were being given a chance to learn, to correct their mistakes, and to grow from the experience. It was a rare lesson, and one that would stay with them forever. The bikers stood quietly, humbled, as the two men continued to observe the damage. The quiet confidence, the steady gaze, and the calm authority of these men left a lasting impression. It wasn't fear in the way of threats. It was respect born from presence and integrity. It was a reminder that true authority doesn't need to shout. It commands simply by existing, by expecting honesty, and by holding people accountable. For the bikers, the day had completely changed. What started as a stunt to show off had become a moment of realization, a turning point. They had learned in a very real and personal way the importance of thinking before acting, of respecting others, and of accepting the consequences of their actions. After the initial shock and tension, the bikers finally realized that there was no escaping the consequences of what they had done. They stood quietly, feeling embarrassed, nervous, and small. The two men had made it clear that honesty and responsibility were the only way forward. There was no yelling, no threats, just calm authority and a firm expectation that the situation would be handled properly. The leader of the bikers swallowed hard and stepped forward. We understand. We'll do whatever we need to fix this," he said. His voice was nervous but sincere. The others nodded, realizing that their usual bravado meant nothing here. They had acted recklessly, and now it was time to make amends. One of the men, the taller of the two, nodded slowly. "Good. The first step is to own your actions. That means reporting this properly and ensuring that the damage is addressed," he said calmly. "No excuses. No shortcuts. Responsibility is not optional." His tone was steady, unwavering. The bikers could feel the weight of those words. It was a lesson they would not forget. The other man stepped closer to the car, inspecting the dents, scratches, and shattered glass. "This car can be repaired," he said, "but it will take time, effort, and money. It is not just a vehicle. It is a symbol of the value we place on our work and our property. Recklessness does not erase responsibility. You need to understand that." His words, though calm, carried authority that left the bikers silent. One of the bikers finally spoke again, his voice shaky. We can call our insurance. We'll pay for everything, please. Just tell us what to do." There was genuine regret in his tone, a complete shift from the arrogant, thrill-seeking attitude they had started with. The two men listened, nodding slowly, acknowledging the sincerity of the apology. They quickly realized that leaving the scene without taking further steps would be irresponsible. The taller man suggested they all sit down briefly to plan the next steps. The bikers, still nervous, followed the instruction, realizing that this was serious and that cooperation was their only option. The two men calmly explained that the first step was to document everything properly. They advised the bikers to take photos of the damage, write down exactly what had happened, and prepare to provide statements to insurance companies. It wasn't about punishment. It was about accountability. The bikers nodded, taking mental notes, and began gathering their phones and cameras to record the damage. Neighbors continued to watch from a distance, captivated by the unfolding scene. They whispered among themselves, fascinated by the calm authority displayed by the two men and the visible remorse of the bikers. Some even commented quietly about how rare it was to see such a dramatic situation handled without shouting or threats. It was a lesson not just for the bikers but for everyone watching. Once the documentation was complete, the taller man advised the bikers to contact their insurance company immediately. "Delaying or avoiding responsibility will only make this worse," he said. "Transparency is key. Tell the truth about what happened. Take responsibility for your actions. That is the only way to resolve this properly." The bikers nodded vigorously, fully understanding the importance of the instruction. As the bikers called their insurance, one of the men stayed by the car, inspecting each detail carefully. The dents, scratches, and broken mirror were serious but repairable. The bikers watched quietly, realizing the true cost of their actions. Money could replace a car, but the lesson they were learning, the value of responsibility and honesty, was far more important. One of the bikers finally broke the silence. We understand now. We got carried away. We didn't think. We're really sorry." His words were quiet, but there was genuine remorse in his tone. The two men nodded, acknowledging the honesty. There was no need for anger. The bikers' own understanding and acceptance of their mistakes was more powerful than any scolding could have been. After the insurance call, the bikers were instructed to remain at the scene until a professional assessment could be made. The two men wanted to ensure that everything was handled properly, and that the bikers followed through with their commitment to take responsibility. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. The bikers understood that completely. The street had quieted down again. The only sounds were the occasional passing car and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. But the atmosphere was different. The bikers were no longer carefree and reckless. Their excitement had been replaced by reflection, respect, and a desire to correct their mistakes. It was a transformation that had begun in just a few minutes but felt profound. The taller man took a deep breath and spoke. "This situation could have been much worse. It could have led to injury, legal trouble, or worse. But you've taken the first step by being honest. The next step is to see it through responsibly. That is how respect is earned. That is how mistakes are corrected." His words were calm but powerful, resonating deeply with the bikers. The bikers nodded, understanding that the lesson extended beyond just this car or this day. It was about respect, accountability, and recognizing the consequences of one's actions. It was about maturity, about growing up, and about facing mistakes head-on. The realization was sobering, but necessary. Neighbors watched quietly, noting the stark contrast between the bikers' earlier bravado and their current subdued, reflective state. The two men had managed to teach a lesson without shouting, without anger, without making a scene. It was a quiet but powerful display of leadership and authority. The bikers' transformation was evident, and it served as a reminder to everyone watching that actions always have consequences. The bikers continued to cooperate, documenting the damage carefully and following instructions. They communicated openly, answering questions honestly, and acknowledging their mistakes. Every step of the process reinforced the lesson they were learning, that recklessness has consequences and responsibility must be taken seriously. As the insurance representative arrived to assess the damage, the bikers explained everything honestly. They detailed their actions, the sequence of events, and the mistakes that had led to the incident. The representative noted the honesty, recording it carefully. The two men observed quietly, making sure the situation was handled properly. Throughout the process, the bikers began to understand the importance of accountability fully. It wasn't just about paying money or fixing a car. It was about learning, a life lesson about growing as people, and about recognizing that actions, no matter how small they might seem, can have far-reaching consequences. After the assessment, the taller man addressed the bikers one last time. "You have the chance to make this right. Follow through. Learn from this. Remember this moment. It may seem like a car, But it is far more than that. It is a lesson in respect, integrity, and responsibility. Do not forget it. His calm authority left no room for argument. The bikers nodded solemnly, understanding the depth of his words. The bikers' attitudes had completely changed. What had started as a moment of excitement and recklessness had become a moment of reflection and growth. They had learned that thrills and stunts can lead to serious consequences, and that facing those consequences honestly is the only way forward. The two men finally stepped back from the car, satisfied that the bikers understood the gravity of the situation. The bikers, still nervous, thanked them sincerely. We really appreciate your patience and your guidance. We've learned a lot today," one of them admitted. The men nodded, acknowledging the statement, but made it clear that learning was only the first step. Action, follow-through, and responsibility would complete the lesson. Neighbors began to disperse, some shaking their heads in disbelief at what they had witnessed. The street, which had been chaotic just moments before, was calm again, but the story of the incident would remain for a long time. People had seen the transformation of the bikers, the calm authority of the men, and the powerful lesson that had been imparted without anger or aggression. The bikers finally left the scene, heads lowered, fully aware of the seriousness of what had happened. They had faced a real-life lesson in responsibility, respect, and accountability. They had learned that actions, no matter how small or playful they might seem, can have significant consequences. Meanwhile, the two men returned to their home, their calm demeanor unchanged. The car, though damaged, could be repaired. The incident had been disruptive, but it had also been an opportunity to teach a lesson. They knew that the bikers would remember this day forever, not because of fear or anger, but because of the lesson in responsibility and integrity that had been imparted clearly and calmly. And so the day, which had started with excitement, chaos, and reckless stunts, ended with reflection, growth, and understanding. The bikers had faced consequences, learned important lessons, and understood that accountability is not optional. The two men had handled the situation with calm authority, ensuring that justice was served without escalating conflict. It was a rare moment, one that combined chaos with calm, recklessness with responsibility, and mistakes with learning. It was a story that would stay with everyone involved forever, a reminder that actions have consequences, that respect must be earned, and that integrity is demonstrated through calm authority, not anger or force. The street had returned to its usual calm by late afternoon, but the memory of the chaos lingered in the air. The bikers had gone, humbled, thoughtful, and aware that they had narrowly escaped a situation that could have ended far worse. They had learned lessons in respect, accountability, and the consequences of reckless behavior, lessons that would stay with them for a long time. Inside the house, the two men looked at the damaged car. Though scratched and dented, it remained a testament to their patience and calm authority. They knew the repairs could fix the car, but the experience had already left a lasting impression, not just on the bikers but on everyone who had witnessed it. It was a reminder that composure, integrity, and presence could resolve situations more effectively than anger or shouting ever could. The men discussed the incident briefly. They didn't need to dwell on it. They had handled the situation responsibly and made sure the bikers were taking accountability. They had been calm but firm, clear that honesty and integrity mattered more than money or anger. Their words had not only guided the bikers but had also set an example for the neighborhood, an unspoken lesson that actions have consequences and that respect and responsibility are essential. Outside, neighbors were still talking quietly about what had happened. Some were fascinated by how the two men had handled the incident. They whispered about the bikers' shock, the calm authority of the men, and how the chaos had turned into a lesson. A few took videos and shared them online, and soon the story began to travel beyond the neighborhood. People marveled at how two ordinary-looking men had transformed a dangerous, reckless situation into a meaningful learning experience. The bikers, meanwhile, were reflecting deeply. On the ride home, their earlier excitement and bravado had been replaced with humility and thoughtfulness. They discussed their actions repeatedly, acknowledging the mistakes they had made and the lessons.